this lesson, we're going to take a look at segments and their midpoints. Let's begin with a definition for the midpoint of a segment. And the midpoint of a segment is actually a point on the segment. That's important to notice that this point on the segment that is equidistant from both endpoints. So basically, it's in the middle. Now, a point is the midpoint of a segment if it is between the two endpoints. That's important, and the distance from this point to each endpoint are equal. So a midpoint has to be between the two endpoints. That's important to notice. And if we want to find a midpoint on a segment, we can do that either from a number line, which we're going to do first, or from a coordinate plane. Now, if we want to use a number line, then in order to find the endpoint, we're going to actually find the average of those two values. So let's look at example 1 here. We want to find the coordinate of the midpoint FG. So we want to find the point that is the halfway between F and G here. So let's count a little bit. Since we have this number line, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the distance from F to G is 6, but we only want halfway. So we'll just go 1, 2, 3. So actually 0 here is the midpoint between F and G. Let's test out our formula that says we actually add the 2 and divide by 2. So we'll add -3 plus 3 and we'll divide by 2, and that does give us 0. Let's look at number 2, where it might be a little bit more difficult. I noticed that A is halfway between -4 and -3. So A is at -3.5 and B is at 3. So this is when the formula becomes a little bit friendlier. We're going to add the 2 together. -3.5 plus 3 will give us -1/2. And then we divide by 2. So you may be thinking, okay, how do I take a -1/2 and I divide it by 2? Well, dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So our midpoint is actually at -1/4 here. Okay, that's when our formula becomes a little bit easier to use because it might not be as friendly to be able to count on the number line between the two endpoints there. Let's do a few more examples here. Look at number 3. If the coordinate of a midpoint is 3 and A is at -2, then find the other one. So this is a little bit different. So before we were given the endpoints and asked to find the midpoint, but now we're told the midpoint and we want to find the other endpoint. So let's draw a picture. I always think a picture helps me to visualize what's going on. We have a segment A and B, and we have a midpoint here. So A, we're told, is at -2, and the midpoint is at 3. So I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to figure out how far it is from here to here. So from 3 to -2, I'm going to subtract those. From 3 to -2 is 5. So I know that from this endpoint to the middle is 5. I need to go from the middle to this endpoint and let it be 5 as well. And so I'm going to take the midpoint and I'll add the 5 and I get 8. So the coordinate for B is 8 here. Now, if we want to find the midpoint on a coordinate plane, then we have to use that same average approach. Let's say that our endpoints have coordinates. We'll call it x1 and y1 and x2, y2. Then in order to find our midpoint, we are just going to do the average of those two. Let me show you what I mean. We'll take the x's and we'll add them together and divide by 2. We'll take the y's and we'll add them together and divide by 2 as well. So we're using the same idea. We just have to do it multiple times because of having x and y coordinates this time. Okay, so let's practice. If we want to find the midpoint between these 2 points, this will be x1 and this will be y1. This will be x2 and this will be y2. So let's do our averages for our midpoint. So let's take our x's and add them together. x1 is -11, x2 is 8, and we divide by 2. Take our y1, add our y2, and divide by 2. And now we just need to simplify. So -11 plus 8 is -3. And 3 plus -7 is -4. All right, almost simplified. That -3.5 will leave like -3 halves, and then I get -2 there as my endpoint. So once I get my formula in place, like once I have all the pieces, all the numbers there, then I can just do the addition and the division and to find my midpoint. Let's do one more like that. Find the coordinates of the midpoint of VW. Okay, so this will be my x1 and my y1. This will be my x2, y2. By the way, if you put them backwards, like if you said this is x2, y2, and this is x1, y1, you're still going to get the same answer. So no worries that you don't, if you mistakenly choose the wrong one to be x1, it still works. All right, so x1 plus y1, x1 plus x2, 3 plus 7, divide by 2. y1 plus y2, divided by 2. Okay, so 3 plus 7 is 10. I get 10 divided by 2. -4 plus 2 is, -6 plus 2 is -4. Getting ahead of myself here. And then I get 5 and -2 as my midpoint there. I hope you like this formula. I like it. I think it's a little bit simpler than, let's say, like the distance formula, which is usually taught with this. But I hope you like it. Let's do a few more examples. Now, these next few, I'm going to give you the midpoint. Let's not skip number 6 here. I'm going to give you the midpoint, and we want to find the other coordinate. So this is a little backwards, okay? So let's visualize what's going on, okay? I've got A and B, and I've got a midpoint M. So A is 0, 1, and I don't have it on a coordinate plane, but that's okay. And my midpoint is 3, 5. And what I don't know is the coordinates of B. I'm just going to call them X and Y. Okay, so let's set up our midpoint formula. Our midpoint formula says to add the X's. So we'll add 0 and X, and we'll divide by 2. And add the Y's. That's 1 and Y, and divide by 2. Now what we're told is that equals 3, 5. So what I want you to be able to do here is to pull out the two equations. We're going to take this piece and we're going to set it equal to the x coordinate of the midpoint. So let me do that. 0 plus x divided by 2 equals 3. And then I want to take the y piece and set it equal to the y coordinate. 1 plus y divided by 2 equals 5. And now let's solve. So I'm going to multiply both of these by 2. That's going to give me 0 plus x equals 6, or just x equals 6. So now we know the x coordinate for B is 6. Let's do the same thing here. We'll multiply by 2. That'll give me 1 plus y equals 10. And then I'll subtract 1 from both sides, and I get y equals 9. So now I know the coordinates of B. They are 6 is the x coordinate, and 9 is the y coordinate there. Okay, one more like that. I always think that when we see the second example, sometimes it just clicks for us. So this time we're told the midpoint of RQ is M, And we want to know what are the coordinates of R if Q is 3, -2. Okay, again, just to picture what's going on, I've got segment RQ and I've got a midpoint M. So we don't know the coordinates of R. We'll call those X, Y. The coordinates of M, we're told, are 4, -1. And the coordinates of Q are 3, -2. Okay, so let's set up that midpoint formula. So we add the x's, x plus 3, and we divide by 2. And we add the y coordinates, y plus -2 divided by 2. And that's supposed to equal the midpoint, which is 4, -1. Okay, now break them apart into your two separate equations. So I've got x plus 3 divided by 2 equals 4. And I've got y minus 2 divided by 2 equals -1. So now we're ready to solve. I'll multiply both sides here by 2. And that'll give me x plus 3 equals 8. And then I can subtract 3 from both sides. And I get x equals 5. Over here, we'll do the same. We'll multiply by 2. And that gives me y minus 2 equals -2. And then we'll add 2 to both sides. And that gives me y equals 0. So now I know the coordinates for R has an x coordinate of 5 and a y coordinate of 0 there. And so I hope this helps you with your midpoint. Notice that we did both ways, where I gave you the two endpoints and I asked you for the midpoint. Then I gave you the midpoint and one of the endpoints and asked you for the other endpoint. And I think those are kind of two very common approaches to this concept. So I hope that helps.